6 armed men thought they had finally trapped the most feared man in Chicago, every exit blocked, every shadow occupied, and hiding behind a concrete pillar on level 3 of the Meridian Street parking garage was a plus-size waitress named Rosa Delgado, who had just finished a double shift and was carrying 2 bags of leftover focaccia from the diner kitchen. Nobody ever looked twice at Rosa. That was their first mistake, and it was about to become somebody's last. Rosa Delgado wore a size 22 and had spent the last 11 years perfecting the art of invisibility. At 31, she had learned early that the world moved faster and more comfortably when a woman of her proportions simply did not draw attention to herself. She wore black non-slip shoes and a forest green uniform apron that stretched wide across her full hips and her thick stomach, and she kept her dark curly hair pinned back so tight it pulled at her temples. She worked the early morning shift at Café Meridian, a narrow diner wedged between a dry cleaner and a parking structure on the south end of the Loop in Chicago. The regulars called her Rosa the Quick because she could carry 4 steaming plates on one arm without spilling a single drop of sauce, and she remembered every order without writing a single word down. To the men in tailored suits who occasionally came in and ordered their espresso doubles and spoke in hushed Italian to each other across the corner booth, Rosa was simply the girl who refilled their water without being asked. She was invisible, unthreatening, forgettable. Design. What nobody in that diner knew was that before Rosa Delgado ever tied an apron around her wide waist, she had spent 6 years training in Krav Maga under a former Israeli Defense Forces instructor named Dov Har-El, who had relocated to a basement gym in Pilsen, and who believed that the most dangerous fighter in any room was always the one nobody expected. Dov had one rule: strength is not about the size of your body, it is about the precision of your mind. Rosa had internalized that rule so completely it had become the architecture of her entire nervous system. She had quit competing after she shattered the collarbone of a male sparring partner twice her size during a regional championship, and the incident had unsettled her in a way that winning never had. She had packed away her credentials and her fighting gloves and taken a job carrying plates instead. It was quieter, safer, for everyone. Walking toward her second-hand Civic on level 3 of the Meridian Street parking structure on a Tuesday night at 11:47, when she first heard the footsteps. Not 1 set. 6. She pressed herself instinctively behind a concrete pillar, the way Dov had trained her to do in any unfamiliar environment. Assess before you act. She peered around the edge of the pillar through the amber-lit haze of the garage and went completely still. Standing at the far end of the level under the green glow of the exit sign was a man she recognized immediately. Dante Ricci. Lived in Chicago and read past the headlines, knew that name. He was 38 years old, and he had the kind of face that belonged on a Renaissance fresco. Sharp jaw, obsidian eyes. A darkness behind them that was not cruelty, but something more precise, more controlled. He was the undisputed head of the Ricci organization. He controlled the shipping corridors along the lakefront, the private financial networks threading through River North, and reportedly had the ear of 3 sitting aldermen. The Chicago Tribune had run his photograph once 6 years ago, and he had never appeared in print again. He moved through the city like a current. You felt the effects long before you identified the source. He was standing utterly still, his black overcoat open at the chest, one hand resting loosely at his side, and 6 men were closing in around him from every angle. Not amateurs. Rosa could see that instantly. The way they moved, synchronized, deliberate, spacing themselves in a clean hexagonal formation that cut off every exit route. Each one wore plain, dark clothing. 2 had suppressed weapons already drawn held low against their thighs. The other 4 carried themselves like men who had done this before and had no anxiety about doing it again. Rosa recognized the formation. She had studied tactical ambush scenarios with Dov for an entire winter, using parking structures as training ground, because he believed they were the most operationally complex enclosed spaces a fighter would ever encounter. Low light, hard surfaces, sound that ricocheted in disorienting waves, concrete pillars that created blind spots, levels that funneled movement. She registered all of this in approximately 4 seconds. She also registered that Dante Ricci's backup had not arrived. She could see the single black SUV parked at an angle near the elevator bank, its driver slumped forward against the steering wheel, unconscious or worse, his earpiece dangling against the window. Dante was alone. The man on Dante's left spoke first. His voice was flat and entirely without theater. "End of the road, Ricci. Bianchi sends his regards." Dante did not move. He did not flinch. His jaw did not tighten. He simply looked at the man with those obsidian eyes with a kind of horrifying patience that Rosa recognized as the look of a person calculating, not panicking. 6-1 with 2 weapons already drawn, and exits sealed. The math was impossible. Rosa set her bags of focaccia down against the pillar with absolute silence. She pulled off her non-slip shoes. She had 4 seconds before the 2 armed men would be close enough to fire without risk of crossing each other's line. She needed the element that every ambush depended on, and that every ambush forgot to account for, a variable they had not planned for, her. She did not run. Running creates sound, and sound destroys surprise. She moved the way Dov had spent 6 years teaching her to move. Low center of gravity, weight distributed through the balls of her feet, her full body loose and fluid the way water moves, not the way a weapon swings. She reached the man closest to her pillar in 3 steps. What happened next took 11 seconds total. The first man did not hear her coming until her forearm was already locked around his throat from behind her full body weight, dropping into the choke with a precision that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with angle and pressure. He went down in 4 seconds without a sound, his suppressed weapon clattering softly to the concrete, where Rosa caught it with her free hand before it hit the ground. The second man with a weapon spun toward the sound. He was too slow. Rosa had already moved again, using the first man's falling body as a pivot point, the way Dov had drilled into her on cold basement mats in Pilsen, until the movement lived in her muscles rather than her mind. She closed the distance in 2 steps, drove the heel of her palm upward into the second man's chin with enough force to snap his head back and send him staggering into the concrete barrier behind him. He slid down it, leaving a smear of dazed confusion, and did not get back up. The remaining 4 men turned. Silence in the parking garage was absolute and terrifying. There was a plus-size waitress in a forest green apron and black socks, standing between them and their target, holding a suppressed weapon with the calm, unhurried stillness of someone who had long since made peace with what she was capable of. "Who are you?" The man on Dante's right said, his voice no longer flat. There was something new in it, something Rosa recognized as the particular variety of fear that arrives when a person realizes the situation they planned for is not the situation they are actually in. She didn't answer. Dante Ricci finally moved, not away, toward her. He positioned himself at her left shoulder with the fluid instinct of a man who recognized an ally and knew better than to question the gift. His dark eyes swept over her face just once. A rapid, thorough assessment. 4 men, Rosa said quietly. 2 will rush, 2 will flank. Take your left. I have your right. A beat of silence. Ricci, the most feared man in Chicago, looked at the woman in the diner apron and said simply, "Understood." What followed was not elegant. It was not cinematic. It was 38 seconds of controlled, devastating efficiency. Rosa took the 2 on the right, using the suppressed weapon as a deterrent on the first and neutralizing the second with a textbook outside leg sweep that sent the man's full weight crashing into the oil-stained concrete with a sound like a bag of wet cement. Dante handled the remaining 2 with a cold economy of movement that confirmed everything Rosa had ever heard about him. He was not a man who fought with rage. He fought the way Rosa fought, with geometry. When it was over, 6 men were on the ground of level 3 of the Meridian Street parking garage. Dante stood in the amber light, breathing steadily, his overcoat still perfectly arranged. Turned and looked at Rosa Delgado with the fullest and most undivided attention she had ever received from another human being in her entire life. His dark eyes moved over her. Not over the green apron or the wide curve of her hips or the fullness of her face. He looked at her the way a man looks at something rare and entirely beyond what he expected to find. "Who are you?" he said again. His voice was different now. Low, careful. The way a man speaks when he understands he is standing in front of something he cannot yet classify. Rosa Delgado. "I work the morning shift at the diner downstairs. I was going home." Dante looked at the 6 men on the ground. He looked back at her. "You were going home," he repeated. "I had focaccia," she said. Something shifted in Dante Ricci's face. It was not a smile exactly. It was the particular softening of a man who has spent decades surrounded by people performing versions of strength and has just encountered the genuine article entirely by accident in a parking garage at midnight, next to a woman in socks holding leftover bread. A black SUV materialized at the entrance of level 3 within 4 minutes. A different one. Dante had sent a single encrypted message from his phone, and the city had responded. 2 men in dark suits stepped out and began the quiet, methodical process of managing the situation on the concrete floor. Dante opened the rear door of the SUV and looked at Rosa. "Let me take you somewhere safe," he said, not as a request, but not as a command either, as something in between that Rosa could not immediately name. "I have to be back for the 6 a.m. shift," she said. "I will have you back by 5:30, Dante said. She got in. The interior of the armored vehicle was warm and entirely silent, the city sliding past the tinted windows like a dark oil painting. Dante sat beside her, his large frame angled toward her with a focused, deliberate attention that made the air feel pressurized. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "Basement gym in Pilsen. 6 years. My instructor was former IDF. Dante absorbed this. You chose to hide it. It was not a question. It was easier," Rosa said simply. "People are more comfortable around women who do not alarm them." Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That sentence did something to his expression that Rosa could not entirely read. Something that moved beneath the surface of his composure like a current under ice. "You alarmed me," he said quietly. "And I do not alarm easily." Rosa looked at him. She had spent 11 years perfecting invisibility, and this man with obsidian eyes and the weight of an entire criminal organization behind him was looking at her as though she were the most visible thing he had ever encountered, as though her full body and her socked feet and her forest green apron were not things to look past, but things to look directly and completely at. It was the most disorienting sensation of her life. The SUV stopped in front of a building in the West Loop. The lobby was marble and low-lit, and a man in a dark suit was already holding the elevator open. Dante led her upstairs without explanation, and Rosa followed because she was either very brave or very tired from the double shift, and at this point she genuinely could not tell which. The penthouse was spare and dark and almost brutally elegant. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below like a circuit board humming with electricity, a single lamp burning amber on a desk covered in documents. Dante poured 2 glasses of aged grappa and handed one to Rosa. She took it. She had earned it. He sat across from her and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "I have 40 men on my payroll. Not one of them read that formation the way you did tonight." Rosa turned the glass in her thick fingers. Dov always said the parking structure is the hardest environment. Too many angles. Most people freeze because they try to process the whole space at once. You have to break it into sections, prioritize by immediate threat radius. Dante was very still. His dark eyes were doing that thing again. The full, undivided attention that felt like being held under a magnifying glass, except that the warmth it generated was not destructive. It was something else entirely. I have been looking for someone with your specific skill set for 3 years, he said. I have interviewed former military, former law enforcement, former intelligence contractors. Rosa waited. None of them could do what you did in 11 seconds in a parking garage in socks. I left my shoes by the pillar, Rosa said. I need to go back for them. They are my good pair. Dante looked at her for another long beat. Then that thing happened in his face again. The thing that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to something warm and entirely unguarded. I will buy you new shoes, he said. I like my shoes, Rosa said. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his large hands folded together. His dark eyes were direct and entirely serious. Rosa Delgado. I want to offer you a position. You would not carry plates. You would not be invisible. You would be part of my inner security detail. You would be protected. You would be compensated in a manner that does not resemble anything a double shift at a diner produces. Rosa looked at him. She looked at the city beyond the window. She thought about Dove in his basement in Pilsen, telling her that the most dangerous fighter is always the one nobody expects. She thought about 11 years of refilling water glasses for men in tailored suits who looked right through her. She thought about focaccia going cold in a bag on level 3 of the Meridian Street parking garage. If I say yes, Rosa said, I need Sundays off. My mother makes lunch. Dante Ricci, the most feared man in Chicago who controlled lakefront shipping corridors and had the ear of 3 aldermen, said without hesitation, You have Sundays. She studied him for another moment. The hard architecture of his face, the obsidian eyes that had not once drifted to her apron or her hips, or the fullness of her face with anything other than the same absolute focused reverence he would give a weapon he had just discovered was loaded. He did not look at her body with disgust, or with pity, or with the particular species of polite indifference she had grown so accustomed to navigating. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that has just reordered his entire understanding of what is possible. I have one more condition, Rosa said. Name it. Nobody calls me the fat waitress. Dante's expression shifted into something absolute and final, a decision being made and sealed simultaneously. You are not a waitress, he said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative quiet that filled the room entirely. You are the woman who just saved my life in 11 seconds in socks, and if any man in my organization speaks about you with anything less than the reverence that requires, I will have a very detailed and personal conversation with him about the consequences. He extended his hand across the space between them. Rosa Delgado looked at the hand of the most dangerous man in the city. Then she put her wide, warm, capable hand into his and shook it. One more thing she said. Waited. I actually do need my shoes back. Those are New Balance 990s, and they are impossible to find in my size. Dante reached for his phone and sent a 3-word message to someone in his organization. Within the hour, 2 men returned from the Meridian Street parking structure, with Rosa's shoes wrapped carefully in a clean cloth, the way you carry something that matters. Dante set them in front of her on the marble floor without comment. Rosa slipped them back on. She stood up. She looked exactly as she had when she walked into the parking garage that night. Forest green apron, dark curls escaping their pins, full body solid and grounded as the concrete pillars she had used to her advantage 11 seconds into an ambush that was never supposed to have a survivor, except it did. 3 weeks later, the Chicago Tribune ran a story about the sudden and dramatic collapse of the Bianchi organization. 6 men had been found secured to a parking barrier on level 3 of the Meridian Street structure by responding officers at 2:14 in the morning on a Tuesday. No weapons were recovered. No surveillance footage was useful. The reporter noted that investigators were baffled by the precision of the neutralizations and could not identify the third party involved. One detective, quoted anonymously, said it looked like someone had studied the space in advance, professional, controlled, no wasted movement. In the corner booth of Cafe Meridian at 6:47 that same morning, a man in a dark overcoat sat down and ordered an espresso double. 1833. Rosa brought it without being asked. She set it down in front of Dante Ricci, and their eyes met across the narrow diner table, and something passed between them that had no name yet, but was already the size and weight of something that would not be put down. He left a card under the espresso cup when he stood to leave. On the back, in precise dark handwriting, were 4 words: Sunday lunch. Bring your mother. Rosa read it twice. She tucked it into the front pocket of her apron. She picked up his empty cup and walked back toward the kitchen, her non-slip shoes quiet against the tile, and her full body moving through the narrow diner with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had spent 6 years learning that strength is not about the size of your body. It is about the precision of your mind. And Rosa Delgado's mind was the most precise and the most dangerous and the most entirely unexpected thing in any room she had ever walked into. The city of Chicago just hadn't known it yet. Did Rosa's 11 seconds give you absolute chills, or was Dante's Sunday lunch the moment that destroyed you completely? If you loved watching the woman nobody saw coming become the woman nobody could forget, smash that like button and share this with anyone who needs a reminder that the most powerful person in the room is always the one the room forgot to watch. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more intense, gripping Mafia romance stories every single week. Tell me in the comments what you thought Rosa's most dangerous weapon really was.